Hey guys, welcome back to Alicyn's Wonderland. I'm your host, Alicyn Packard, and with me today in the studio is a very special guest, Daniel Rojas, the music composer best known for his work on Kipo in the Age of Wonderbeasts, as well as shows like Hit Monkey. So please join me in welcoming Daniel Rojas. You're watching Alicyn's Wonderland, inside the world of animation and games. Daniel, welcome to Alicyn's Wonderland.
Thank you so much.
Oh, so glad to have you here. Now, you have a pretty interesting story about how you grew up. Both your parents were musicians.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I got very lucky because sometimes, and especially seeing like some other of my friends early on or classmates, it's difficult to explain to your parents that you're gonna dedicate your life to music and arts and stuff. And I never had that problem because my parents were both in the arts and they fully understood the value of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that was one of the biggest things that I was always encouraged to take this seriously if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I was never forced. And I mean, at some point in my life, I wanted to do something completely different. After watching Jurassic Park, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I wanted to be a astronaut, all kind of things. But I think my parents always knew that I was gravitating towards music.
Mm-hmm.
So they always kept me in classes and, pretty excited about music in general.
Yeah.
And then the more serious I got, they fully encouraged it, which is when I see the divide, because I had friends who were really talented, but their parents wouldn't really encourage that side as much. They thought it was a little bit, like almost getting away from the real job or whatever, that stigma that we have as artists.
Yeah.
And I thankfully never had that.
There's no money in it, or you
my
get
parents
a real
never
job.
made me afraid of that. They just basically told me, if you want to do this, then you got to do it for real. Like if you really want to pursue it, you got to take it seriously and you got to, get it together.
Well, I have to
But other than
fangirl
that,
out a little bit because when I was listening to the soundtrack to Kipo, I was blown away. I was like, this is just not your average kids album. I mean, I will go on a jog and put it on and just, the beats are so fresh and you have such a broad understanding of tones and styles. It's almost like, they could be like, give me something that sounds like this. And then you're turning around this, very uniquely different and diverse album of music. So,
wow, thank you. I mean, that's obviously what I would love to hear, and was our concept when we were kind of getting started on that, was to make it as diverse as the show is, try to kind of make a metaphor musically of what the show represented, which was.
And how many instruments do you play?
I would say, comfortably, anything that is like guitar-like, guitars, bass, ukulele, and piano. So keyboards and guitars, that's where I feel I'm like fully proficient. That's where I got my degree and everything. And now as far as like messing around, then I do get to record a lot of percussion, of course, because it's, part of my job to find sounds and things like that. And I can do like decent enough job in like cello or viola if I have to like record very slowly. But if I need to record something professional and for it to sound like something from a conservatory, I would not say I could play those instruments. So I would say I'm a mediocre cellist and a proficient guitarist and pianist.
Although with music and home recording, there's a lot you can fix in the mix.
I'm very, very glad for quantization and tuning. Yeah. It's been a big helper in my cellist career. Yeah.
Who are some of the songwriters that have inspired you throughout the years?
Songwriters. Wow, there's so many, honestly.
Or musical artists.
Yeah.
I'll accept that.
I think it would really depend on the time, like the year or let's say.
Let's take it back to you as a child, like a kid. My son is 6, so when he was watching Kipo, like the music, he loves it, and he actually performed one of your songs at his little
that's amazing. You shared it. Yes,
show.
That made me so happy. Yeah,
it was very cool. But like when you were like a little kid, who were some of your musical influences?
Well, again, because my parents were musicians, I was very lucky to be presented with music is good or bad depending on your taste, of course, but music like Michael Jackson and the Beatles and things like that very early on, which, is universally considered pretty good.
Yeah.
And my parents had good taste, I would say, so as a child, I was able to experience all that type of music fairly early. But of course, I was also into very pop music, just like what my classmates and my friends would listen to. So at the time of growing up, Costa Rica is a mix. So there are bands in Spanish, a lot of things that come either from Mexico or Colombia or things like that. In Costa Rica itself, we didn't have that much like Costa Rican music growing up. But as far as like Anglo bands, like American bands and things like that, I went through like some rock phase where I liked even pretty heavy stuff like
Metallica.
Iron Maiden and things like that. Metallica, I liked it, but not so much. I went a little more left of center with like Megadeth and things like that. That was like my high school years. And the reason why I pursued guitar, although in the end I did a jazz guitar degree, but rock music had so much guitar that was a big influence.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I would say I try to stay current in the world of pop. So I'm not one of those snobby, classical musicians that doesn't like pop music. I listen to pop music all the time.
Yeah.
And by pop, I mean the broader term of it. Like I love hip hop, I love trap, I love even in Spanish, like some reggaeton artists, not the whole thing, but some of them are doing great stuff. So I try to keep it broad and fresh. And I also like to dig in a little bit. Like one of my favorite artists is Banks, who's not like super famous mainstream, but she does amazing music in the style, I would say, like a darker version of what Billie Eilish is in the mainstream. So things like that I really love.
Yeah. And so you went to college and you were majoring in jazz, I believe?
Correct. Yes.
And so then you came out of there, and also how did you make the transition from being a jazz musician to being a music composer?
I did start from the very bottom, honestly, by picking up lunch orders and making good espresso so
here
that they
LA?
Would call me. Yes, here in LA.
Okay.
So I studied in
interning,
Texas. Kind of, exactly. So I studied in Texas and I did get my degree in jazz at the University of North Texas. And then I moved to LA and I had a friend who worked at Remote Control Studios, which is Hans Zimmer's studio. And he was able to kind of invite me a couple times to just be around. So it was not an official job or anything, just be around and be of service if people kind of need you. And, it wasn't that long ago. That was like 2009. I came here the summer of 2008 for a couple months. Yeah. But it was, I think, a little bit easier than it is today, although it's only been 10 to 15 years. But I from what I hear nowadays, they require a lot of paperwork and they require you to be like enrolled in a school or whatever.
Yeah.
Back in the 2010s or before, you just showed up.
Oh,
you know? And if they needed lunch, they would shout at you and you would go get the lunch and bring it back. So it wasn't as official as it is now. But that was kind of how I started to dip my feet into this world. And then I got connected with Klaus Badelt, who is most known for his score to Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, okay.
Who's another German composer. And he was the one who I would say took me under his wing a little more in a musical way, in the sense that with him, I was actually working on music. Before him, the time before that, it was more like just running errands and doing hard drive backups and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. Waxing the car.
Exactly. All of that stuff. But yeah, so in my career, to kind of try to do it quickly, I started as an assistant with Klaus, doing a lot of tech work, like setting up his servers, his sessions, things like that, recording for him. And then I kind of graduated up, to become an arranger. Then I started orchestrating. Can you just
take it back even and tell us what an arranger does?
Yeah, for sure. So in the world of film music, the word arranger is a little bit different to what a classical musician might think of an arranger. Like when I was in school an arranger would be someone who would take, a piano sketch and like arrange it for different instruments and things like that.
Got it.
In the world of film music, it usually means more production. So an arranger is someone who takes a sketch and programs it into something that sounds like a proper cue that can be presented. That's kind of what they call an arranger. So for example, a lead composer would come up with an idea or a theme, and then the arrangers would take it and create cues. And, it's a little bit broader because you're doing a little more than just arranging, but you add the percussion, you divide the strings properly, you add some brass, you add some synths and things like that, and kind of build it up for it to be presentable to whoever is the filmmaker.
Got it. So you dabbled in that, and then?
Then I dabbled a little bit in orchestration, which is another process of the film thing. And again, orchestration... all this, I think the film music has taken all these terms and kind of done their own thing with them. Because orchestration, when I was in college, was
you're
very...
using the same term.
It is the same term, but I think it would be interesting to some people watching to know that in the world of film, orchestrating is more like putting things on paper.
Okay.
So since we work so much on a computer, everything is in a DAW, like Logic or Cubase, Pro Tools, whatever it is. Once you want someone to play that live, you need to put that on paper, on score, for the musicians to read it. And that's what an orchestration mostly does, orchestrator mostly does, is take the MIDI, basically, and write it out, whether it is for an orchestra or a chamber ensemble or just one violin. You have to be able to take the MIDI, write it properly, to make sure it's within a range, that you're not writing notes that they cannot play, things like that.
Wow.
So that's another job that is very common for young aspiring composers to do. And you learn a lot because since we work, again, so much with computers, sometimes you do things that are not playable. Like, you might write a note that is too low for a violin because you're using a patch.
Right. Okay.
But when you're writing it, you need to know that they cannot go past a certain G, and if you write that lower than that, there's nothing they can do.
It's a new instrument.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the things that, I think as a young musician, it's important to kind of learn if you want to eventually be a composer.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how long did you dabble in the different avenues?
As an assistant of those things?
As an assistant, yeah.
About 3.5 years.
Seems radically quick.
No, yeah, it wasn't as long. I did do a lot of projects in that time because it was pretty intense. And I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it was definitely the cliche Hollywood assistant where you're working until 3 a.m. and back at 7. Sometimes, like sleeping 3 hours, chugging a bunch of coffee and terrible deadlines. It was 3.5 years that felt like 10. Yeah. But it was kind of concentrated. And on the flip side, I did feel like I learned a lot, and I, made some contacts and learned the craft, I would say, by just watching other people doing things. But yeah, coming in like 2012, that's when I decided, let me try to just start doing my own things.
So how did that happen? I mean, what was your first gig?
My first gig was actually commercial. And that was the gig that made me like jump off from the assistant world. It was a commercial for Pepsi in Spanish, but for the Super Bowl. So it was a whole like campaign. It was like 6 commercials for Pepsi in Spanish, mostly for the American market. So like Univision and Telemundo and those things. But the world of commercials can pay pretty well if you compare it to the assistant world. Yeah. So I saw that, I landed it, and I was like, okay, this is kind of my exit right now. Because it wasn't, I mean, in hindsight, it wasn't like a astronomical amount by any means. But I was making such little money as an assistant that was like 6 months. Yeah. You're like, okay, in like 3 weeks, I could make what I normally make in 6 months. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm out. I'm going to try my own thing.
And then you can be pitching.
Yes, exactly. So I did start mostly with commercials. So that Pepsi commercial was with an ad agency in Austin, Texas, that specialized, again, in the kind of Hispanic market. And that was kind of an untapped territory.
And you are Hispanic. I mean,
yes, exactly.
Was that a coincidence or?
No. It was, I mean, it had to do with some friends. I had this Mexican friend here so I'm Costa Rican, but my friend was a commercial producer, and he had sent my music without me even knowing to these other people in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, thanks, bud.
Exactly. So he definitely hooked me up. And since what I did was very cinematic at the time, I mean, nowadays I've kind of branched out to other things, but I was working on this pretty like cinematic big films. And the Hispanic market for commercials had like a bit of a hole in that, you know, like they were not so epic as like English commercials at the time. So if you would watch an English speaking commercial for Toyota, it was all film sounding like, you know, like super epic. But then you would watch the Spanish ones and they were still a little behind, like with the, you know, weak ukulele or something. So when I sent my demos, that ad agency thought it was pretty fitting for their campaigns. So they started using me quite a bit. And I did, several other things with them. And the world of commercial is very much like our world here in the film, that is just word of mouth. So one of the producers would move to a different ad house and then would call me up. And so I spent a good 2 to 3 years dealing mostly with commercials. And since it's not as steady, I would complement it with just writing a lot with musicians, like artists, which is
pop.
Yeah, like pop music.
Oh, so doing co-writes and stuff like that? Amazing.
For like sync, you know, try to sync things. So write original songs to like pitch to TV shows and things like that. So I would say from like 2012 to 2016, those 4 years, I was pretty apart from film and TV. Yeah. I just kind of dedicated that time, and it wasn't a conscious decision. It was more kind of like what happened. You know, I did a bunch of commercials and co-writes with all types of artists. And I started landing some songs here and there on like whatever, even reality shows or things like that. But it was a good time, I feel, in hindsight, to expand my sonic palette, you know, to just try different things and, you know, read briefs and just try to like do something that sounds like this or something that sounds like that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your process for when you first read the brief till when you pitch the song?
Yeah. So I think, well, like I mentioned briefly before, my girlfriend is an actress and voiceover, so she does a lot of auditions. And I think there's a lot of similarities between the auditioning process and the demoing process, except the demoing takes a lot longer. You know, an audition, you might be able to do it in an hour if you learn your lines and, you know, you do 5 takes or whatever, you're kind of done. Demo might take, you know, anywhere from 3 to 5 days if you have the time. You might have to do it overnight if that's what it takes. Wow. But in general, I think they usually send you references. So you try to listen to the references and definitely not copy, because the job is not to copy things. So that can be very dangerous. So I think the job is usually to see what the through line is, you know, try to dig a little deeper and not just find like, oh, that beat is cool, let's just do that. It's more like, okay, they send these 5 songs. What do they have in common? Like, how do they make me feel? Why did they like all these 5 songs? So I think that's kind of how you start. You know, you try to find the through line of whatever the brief was trying to say. And then it's a lot of trial and error. You know, you just start and try to
see what feels good.
See what feels good. Yeah.
Do you start with a beat, or do you start with a melody or lyrics?
Honestly, it's always different. So it depends too. Also, if I start with a guitar or with a piano, you write very different songs. Yeah. If you sit on the piano, or if you take a guitar, I feel like if you take a guitar, things tend to be more rhythmic because of the nature of the instrument, that is a little more manageable as far as rhythm goes. The piano, you tend to do something maybe a little more cinematic, not always, but it tends to be that, or ballady, or something that it's not necessarily in the piano. You don't have the ability to be as rhythmic as you would. That's why, for example, the music of someone like Ed Sheeran sounds so different than someone like Adele. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that although both of them use pianos and guitars, Ed Sheeran's music is very clearly guitar-y. Every time I hear like they all start like that because he's writing on a guitar. Yeah. Whereas someone more like Adele or Amy Winehouse, you know, it was very clear that they wrote those songs on the piano.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so what was your very first job then, coming in as a composer for television?
My first major one it was actually Kipo.
Was it? Yeah.
My
Wow.
like I would say major as far as it was a big network with both Netflix and DreamWorks. I did do a good amount of like reality TV, but that's not scoring. That's more syncing. You know, like you don't write to
Music
picture
for
in
sync.
reality TV. You just write music that fits a show.
Daniel, we need a angry, jealous, rage-filled Hollywood song.
It's funny, but reality TV is full of like epic music.
Oh, yeah.
You don't realize it until you're like pitching for it. But it could be the most trivial thing. Like, let's go into the supermarket. And the music sounds like a trailer for Inception. It's just the way it's cut, you know? Like they're like, oh, what are you getting for dinner? And the music is like, because they try to like really up it up. So it's a good place to like sync music. You know, if that's the type of music that you want to be doing, you'd be surprised. And as you watch reality TV, you will notice it more now. You're like, wow, this is really epic music for this moment. But that's how they build these shows.
Now, did any of the songs that you submitted for your pitch for Kipo and the Age of Wonderbeasts, did they get in the show?
Not of what I pitched. So the pitching process is there's several layers to it.
Yeah.
So you start usually with a demo reel that can be just existing music that you have. And this is not just for Kipo, just in general. You know, like when a show comes in and they don't have a composer in mind and they want to try some people, they'll make a brief, you know, explain what the show is about, give you a little log line and some reference tracks. And then they ask for a reel. So you put together a reel of anywhere from 10 to 15 tracks or songs. And that's what's going to take you to the next level, you know? So many times that's where it ends. You send your reel and you never hear back. When you hear back, our callback is usually what they call spec, or in our world we call it spec for, I think it stands for specific, maybe?
Speculative.
Speculative, I'm sure. you would know it. So you do spec, and that's actually to picture. Yeah. In the world of animation, it usually means to animatics, because composers get in fairly early. So animation is months away still. So they'll give you some animatics, which are basically storyboards that move a little bit. For those that don't know, I'm sure I know you know animatics. But and then you try to score to the animatics. And that's also something that you get better at with time. Because at the beginning, if you're used to scoring live action, you're used to getting so many cues visually that storyboards can feel really lacking in that sense. Like things don't really move as much. But I think like everything, it's just practice. I think once you see more storyboards, you start learning more how the process is.
And so maybe the animator even is inspired by what you're bringing to the table.
That too, for sure.
As they go through the process of getting better boards, more detailed storyboards.
For sure. Especially in a show like Kipo or shows that have characters that are musicians or play instruments inside of the show. That's crucial. We always have to do that music before they animate or in general. So there's, they call it pre-production music, which means you write all the music and then the animators will animate to that. Because otherwise, it's almost impossible to make something musical if what you're trying to do is just match whatever they animated to nothing. You know, it's so hard because there's no rhythm, there's no shape to it. Yeah. And you see that sometimes in shows. Like sometimes you watch a show and you're like, okay, they definitely wrote that afterwards. Because it's like all over the place. And I don't blame the musicians, you know, like it can be pretty tricky. So the scoring happens afterwards, but the pre-production music definitely has to be like pre animation.
Now, when you did get the job hired on Kipo, was it? Did you get to work very closely with Rad Seacrest?
Yes, very, very closely. So at the beginning of it, when we were doing the pre-production, it was mostly Rad, and at that time there was a second showrunner, Bill Wolkoff, who was one of the main writers. I think it was like the head of the writing room. And they were co-show running up until post-production. So since I started on Kipo so early, I got to work with him and Rad together quite a bit at the beginning of it. But once we started post, then he was out and it was just Rad. So the whole scoring process was only with Rad.
Yeah.
And of course, the music department at DreamWorks, who are very involved in everything. And Kipo also had music supervisors, which was something that not all animated shows have.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, a music supervisor is someone that licenses music to, okay.
Exactly. But they also find the songs. So it's not just the clearance part of it. That's the boring side of their job.
Yeah.
The creative part of their job is trying to find the songs, put playlists together, and shape the sound of the show together with the composer. So in our case, we had 2 music supervisors who work together, Keir Lehman and James Cartwright, who are fantastic. And they've music supervised a ton of movies that I'm sure you watched, even Into the Spider-Verse, The Mitchells versus the Machines. So they're big, and a ton of shows. Like, I mean, if you look at their IMDb, it's probably 100 shows that you would know.
Wow.
So we got really lucky that they were part of Kipo, because they had really good taste and they had a very effective way of working, which to me, being my first bigger show, was super helpful, because it wasn't, I was kind of the only newbie. They knew very well what they were doing, and that was helpful because I could rely on that, even ask them when I was kind of in doubt of how something works. I'll be like, oh, that's fine, like kind of guide me through it a little bit.
Come under my wing.
Yeah, exactly, which was great.
And your styles seem very simpatico. Like the show was so cohesive between.
Thanks. Yeah, no, we definitely, we work together very closely. I was in touch with them nearly every day for about 2 years.
Amazing.
So, and in fact, we've done other shows together afterwards. But it was a very collaborative process in that sense, because every episode, or most episodes, I think there were a few that didn't have, but most episodes had licensed songs that they found. And then I always had to make it cohesive, like you said, like just try to make sure that the score blended into them and out of them in a natural way that didn't feel odd.
Amazing.
So we had to be in touch all the time.
That's so cool. So you were a child of the 90s as well.
Yes, I am.
Were you a big cartoon fan?
Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
I watch cartoons all the time.
And were you particularly drawn to the music in cartoons?
A lot, yes. There's so many cartoons, but I do remember, I loved the Looney Tunes. I loved Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs. There's so many shows that I would watch.
Yeah, and what they brought to the table really helped to enhance those shows in sort of a new way, right? Prior to that, we hadn't seen that level of songwriting.
Totally. Yes. No, it was so memorable and made the show so much more enjoyable. And I think a big reason why I do so much animation is precisely how much I enjoy that as a kid. And that even sticks, 20 something years afterwards. I'm 34 now, but after, growing up, I still feel like a lot of my background comes from that time of just growing up watching cartoons all the time and loving them.
Yeah.
So, and movies as well.
And was it a strategic move to start doing composing more for animation? You also worked on Hit Monkey.
Correct.
So was that intentional, or did it just kind of one led to the other?
Funny enough, it wasn't. Actually, before Kipo, I had done very little animation. I had done some animated shorts, but I had not done any shows or any features in animation. Everything was live action. But I do think, looking back, that it only made sense that my career would be kind of kickstart with animation, because I was such an animation fan. Like we were saying, that it felt when I was in the room with animation people, like animators or showrunners for animation shows, I was at home.
Yeah.
Like when they would speak about something, I would know it. If they would mention a movie, I knew that movie. I knew who did the music for that. I knew the songs. I knew everything, which is something that it's so important. I feel we don't realize it's as important as it is, that when you're talking to the creatives, to the people who are going to be your bosses, you need to know what their world is really well. And so that's why, for example, if let's say gore horror is something that I didn't watch very much. It's not something that I enjoyed very much. I know there's a whole group of people that love that. But if I were in the room with a bunch of gore horror filmmakers, I wouldn't have that much to talk about. I mean, I saw the Saw movies or something. Like I've seen the most mainstream ones. Yeah. But it's not something that is part of who I am as much. And I have colleagues that do that type of music, and usually they know everything. They've watched 10 gore movies this year and they know them. And that's how they are proficient enough to talk to the filmmakers. And I feel like that's what happened to me with animation. I was very proficient in animation knowledge in general, that when I walked into a room at DreamWorks, I knew what I was talking about without really trying to to pretend or push it or anything. It was just something that, I've seen all Shrek movies. What are you, all of them, even the not so good ones. But
so, and then can you tell us at all what you're working on right now?
Yes. I mean, as usual, you have to be a little bit disclosed on some of that. But I'm doing a new animated show with Nickelodeon.
Amazing.
That, as far as I know, it's coming out later this year. Yeah. So towards the end of the year. Okay. And I'm pretty excited about it. And then I'm working on a couple other projects. I just wrapped up an independent film, which is live action. Oh, wow. That is called Charlie and the Pandemic with Jordana Brewster. It's like a pandemic dramedy. Oh, which cute. Is like, I think we have a whole wave of pandemic movies coming up. We need a this is one of them. Yeah. A couple other side projects that I'm working on. But those are, I would say, the main ones.
Now, you spend so much time as a composer. Do you also have time for any personal music or?
Honestly, I mean, for many years I did have my own projects or collaborations with artists. It's been a little bit tougher the past 3 years, I would say, kind of since Kipo. It's been kind of nonstop, which I'm very grateful for, of course. But it's been, overlapping shows pretty much. So I did do something that I would say is a bit of a passion project, which is opening up in a month. And I wrote with a friend of mine this piece for the Pageant of the Masters, which is a live event in Orange County in Laguna Beach.
Is it a parade or something?
It's going to be almost 60 shows. So it's going to be every night for July, August, and part of September. And it's like a live show that mixes art with music. So there's paintings, and they recreate the paintings, and they use tableau, which is like a French art, which is like people recreate the paintings and stay there, and then music plays behind them. It's very bourgeois, but it's a cool opportunity to write music to live ensemble. And it's like a full-on chamber orchestra with strings, brass, woodwinds, percussion. So I wrote our piece is 17 minutes long. It's a big one. Wow. And it's called Around the World's Fair. And so it goes through a bunch of different countries: India, Mali, there's a little American section, Mexico, China. So I got to write all different types of music, which is what drew me through it. When I was offered the opportunity, I saw the script, I was like, this is cool. I don't get to write for amazing musicians to play live for 60 shows all the time. So, but that was definitely a bit of a passion project, because it wasn't, it's not what I really do nowadays. Yeah. But it was
wow, I want to go down and see it. That sounds amazing.
I believe it starts July 5th. And it's going to be in Laguna Beach at the Laguna Bowl or something they call it. So good to know. Yeah, that was.
I'm sure you'll be there.
Little side thing. I'll be there a few of the nights, perhaps? Probably. Yeah. I'll probably go down. I don't know, 2-3 nights. Yeah.
Do you get to be backstage with the orchestra?
I'll definitely get to say hi to them, cool. And I've been in touch with the concertmaster, the conductor. And I wrote this with a friend of mine who's also Costa Rican, Andres Soto. And he, we actually, met here in the US, but it was a big amount of music. So I also needed someone to kind of take some of that
Wow.
for sure.
Gosh, I mean, I feel like we could chat all day. I want to ask you about co-writing, but I want to get to one question before we go,
Yes.
which is, what advice do you have for anybody that might want to become a music composer? I was going to say producer, but I mean, I guess maybe either.
That too.
Yeah.
That too. I mean, actually, you bring a good point that I can quickly point to, which is I think production and composition nowadays are pretty much one. You know, like back in the day, it was said that orchestration and composition were one, because it's true. When you back in the day of Beethoven and Mahler, and I mean even as soon as the early 20th century with the Russian composers, Prokofiev and all of those, their orchestration was so embedded in their composition that you cannot take it apart. You cannot have someone like Ravel or Debussy without their orchestration. It just doesn't work. But nowadays, it's exactly the same with production. Production is so important to the sound of any composer that if you just distill the music, it won't really get you very far. But if your music is well produced and it's a whole, it's just the music and the production can live together, that's the type of music that people are going after. So I would highly encourage people, if they're young, I would say, learn music, obviously, but make sure you learn production, because that's going to be super important. And if they're not as young, I would say actually probably even more emphasis on learning how to present their music properly, because most likely, if they're not that young and they want to get into film music, they're already musicians, I would assume. Most of them are probably people that play instruments or do things like that. So they might already have the music side. But I think learning how to put it all together and have a good sound would be what's going to make you have clients one day. People that want to, use your music.
Amazing. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming out and talking with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been so great to learn about what you do as a music composer and all the different aspects. And we can't wait to see your new show coming out, hopefully end of the year.
Yes. Yeah. We can add it as comment later on when I can share what it is.
Yay. Well, thanks everybody for watching this show. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and feel free to tell a friend, because we are going to keep creating these amazing episodes for you. So we'll see you next time.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.